disconnection, so that we actually operate from a disconnected state from all of nature. And I also want to clarify, when I use the word nature, I'm meaning that's inclusive of everything. It's not just the natural world or wilderness. It is also humanity. It is our wilderness as much as it is our cities. So it's inclusive of everything when I talk about nature today. So a disconnected attitude, belief system, position keeps us stuck in a framework that is self-reinforcing and disparaging. I think this is a big reason why we haven't been able to solve or been very successful in solving a lot of our social, environmental, and economic problems. If you think about early humans when we left the savannas, which was a necessary departure from nature, a necessary separation from the natural world for our evolutionary process, this is not something new that ecopsychology brings out. Darwin talked about this, Charles Darwin, C.G. Jung, Carl Jung, the famous psychoanalyst from Zurich, E.O. Wilson, and certainly most recently in his latest book, they've all talked about this idea of our separating out from the natural world that was a necessary part of our evolutionary process. What's interesting about this move, and C.G. Jung talks about this a great deal, is that we have separated out so far that we actually became disconnected from the natural world. We'd gone too far in the separation in a sense, so that we became disconnected from the planet, our particular landscape that we were maybe lived with or associated with, disconnected from our instincts, our sense of interdependence with the natural world. And this is a core issue with ecopsychology, that we've become disconnected from not only ourselves, but each other and the natural world, and we operate from this place. So disconnection then is a critical factor in human mental malaise. It's our inability to flourish, if you will, our inability for our ecosystem to flourish. It's a lack of well-being in our ecosystem, and a lack of understanding about that sense of well-being. We don't quite know, when we're in a sense of well-being, or if you will, health, although I don't like to use that word health because we don't really quite know what that means. What is mental health, in other words? So I'll use the word well-being today. But it's also that place of human suffering. And we can see this distancing not only in ourselves, we can see it from our community, in our culture, and certainly in a global culture. But separation, let me just step back a minute here. Separation is necessary. We need separation. We need separation from mother, so that we can understand who the mother is unto herself, so that we can create our own identity, and that we get to understand who we are as our own ecosystem. We need separation from family, and many times we need separation from culture. We have to actually leave something in order to find out who we are and what we are about. Although that's not an easy process. So I'm suggesting our disconnected state has become our normal state. And just think about that for a minute, that our disconnected state is actually our normal state. So we don't recognize disconnection. We don't see where and how we operate from this unfeeling or even unnatural place in how we approach problems, how we relate to each other, in making our policies and procedures, forming practices, developing organizations, building institutions. So disconnection is a major driver in all of our global issues that we're challenged with, and falls in the domains of psychology, and as well as, I'll point out today, neuroscience. So in the language of neuroscience, then what's actually happening in the brain with this disconnected place? Basically, it's saying it's dividing the brain, very clearly in two. Of course, the brain is divided in two, but we know that there's interactions that go across the brain. But in a disconnected state, it would be like saying, for the right brain that pays attention to the other, whatever that is that exists apart from ourself, the other. So the right brain pays attention to the other. It sees itself in relationship with other. The left brain is a little bit different animal, if you will. The left brain pays attention to a virtual world, a created world, which is self-consistent, self-reinforcing, if you will, and self-contained. So it operates from a disconnected place. So already we're starting out with a little bit of a tension here. Part of us is connected and part of us is disconnected. So that we'll see as we, yes?
Just for my own clarification, when we talk about the we are disconnected, who do we mean? Because I can think of some subsets of humankind that are not. Arguably, of course, the ecological thinkers and the environmental movement per se is more connected than everybody else. But then there are indigenous communities as well, and we don't have to go as far as that, rural communities that are not disconnected in the sense that I perceive you try to convey. So are we talking really about urban, northern and western society segments? What do you mean with we?
Excellent question, thank you for that. I'm using we in the sense of a very general humanity. And of course there are many pockets of, not just indigenous traditions, but there are pockets of culture that maybe would not perceive themselves or be perceived in any other way as disconnected from the earth. They live that closely with the natural cycles of the earth. So I'm using this in a general sense. And also, I'll just make a comment on something you said that I think is important, that just because we are in conservation, environmental industries, or ecological studies, I don't think that necessarily means we're more connected. So, what I'm proposing is just, this is a general overview of the human condition, that we many times operate from a disconnected place. And of course we could argue that there are people who aren't disconnected in societies and cultures that aren't. But that's more of an anthropological study, and I'm not going there today. I'm just talking about this in a very general term. Does that make sense? I'm asking you to hold a little bit of attention around that, because it is a generalization, of course. I'm also saying let's focus on just us in here. Focus on yourself. Don't so much go out to try to analyze are there other cultures or other peoples that aren't connected or disconnected, because there are. What I want us to do is focus on our ecosystem and just try to get an idea of maybe where you are connected or disconnected, because we can have these arguments and they're certainly valuable and viable, and they are there. Not everyone on the planet is disconnected, so I'm using this in a very general way. It's something that I want us to try to take and focus in on ourselves. Does that help?
Let's take it as the working hypothesis.
Yes, thank you.
Not necessarily being very firm about how general this thing is.
Everybody okay with that? Any other questions? Good question, thank you. Okay. So, by the end of the day, then, to finish up this sort of neuroscience piece, I hope that we get an idea that we need, both part of the brains, and how do we activate both part of the brains, and what does that really mean when we're doing that in everyday field work. The example of this is, here's what I was talking about with the different parts of the brain. And of course, the neurosciences has just exploded in its understanding of the human being so far, even in just the last 3 to 5 years. So this isn't a day on neuroscience, but it is important to understand what's going on in the brain when we are facing challenges and changes, especially the ones that we're talking about at the conference today. So let me just give you an example of what I'm talking about here when we come up against this place of trying to change the story. An example is that if a mine is closed down due to unsafe mining practices, but the rationality or the belief system or the narrative stays in place around that mine, the story which basically created that mine stays in place or is left standing, and although the mine shuts down in one place, it goes and opens up down the mountainside somewhere, then that disconnected thinking will simply produce another mine with the same ethos, with the same unsafe practices, with the same operating practices, with the same corporate culture. If a revolution destroys a government, but the disconnected patterns of thought that produced that government are left intact, then the next government that comes in place, if those patterns are still there, they will just continue to repeat themselves. And of course, we're seeing some of this potential in the Pan-Arab world today. So disconnected narratives are rooted in the human unconscious. They're rooted in places that we just simply don't know about ourselves. Parts of our psychology we don't know. They have contributed to the dominant worldview of anthropocentrism, which is, of course, one of our main stories, our main myths right now. And they drive the behaviors and practices around the big issues that we're discussing at the Congress this week. What I want to say about ecopsychology that it's not, just very quickly, it's not about applying psychological expertise, whatever that is, to environmental problems. Nor is it simply applying scientific data to try to solve environmental problems. Those fall more into the areas of environmental psychology or even conservation psychology. So, questions before I jump into the material and a little bit deeper? We thoroughly confused. Good.
Monica, so just building on what you just said about the line goes down, climate.
Maybe use the microphone there at the table so everybody, this room is so big, you know. Thank you.
So just taking, just trying to take that example into some of the subjects we're dealing with at the conference today, just so we understand the language. Climate change. One of the, we might want to do something about climate change, but unless we understand the patterns of disconnection and the reason why we continue to burn fossil fuels or cut down large tracts of forest, etc., is because of that sense of disconnection, then we end up repeating the things that we know we shouldn't be doing. Is that?
Yeah, and let me give you an example of that. Thank you for that. For example, our fossil fuel companies, we've had Shell represented here over the course of the Congress, and I listened to the gentleman talk from Shell the other night. Not to, peg Shell, let's just say the fossil fuel companies, so I don't get into too much trouble this morning. But the people that want to extract from the earth, there's a particular mindset, a particular belief system, particular attitudes they have about the earth, about the planet, about our society. And for them to mine fossil fuels beyond the point that's sustainable, I'm not saying that's bad or good. I don't want us to move into judgmental places here. One thing about ecopsychology is we have to lay everything out on the table just to try to understand it, not to force a judgment one way or the other. So let's be clear about that. But the idea then, if you've got a number of companies around the world who have a mindset that extracting is okay, and extracting to the point of depletion is not a problem, whether it's depletion to the environment or destruction to the society that lives around that particular area, then that's a belief system that is held in place by those individuals. And those individuals then develop a corporation or business based on that particular narratives, those particular attitudes and ideas, or ideals. So within that corporate structure then, they foster disconnected ideals and attitudes and belief systems. So of course then people that work for that particular type of industry may also begin to promote within themselves a sense of disconnection, because they're following a very strong sort of company cultural mindset that it is okay to do this kind of extraction or even over-extraction. Because the main narrative that they're following is economic. That if it has economic value, then that value trumps environmental value, social value, whatever. So that mindset follows all the way through. And of course, then the destruction ensues from that. So climate change is huge. To start to work with climate change, then we would have to start to work with those who are perpetuating climate change. And that's very difficult because not everyone is, I mean, look at the number of folks coming to the conference this morning. Not everyone is interested in change. It's very, very, very hard, especially when it's connected into our economics, which is interesting because economics is tied into ecology. Etymology, it means very much the same thing. Eco, again, oikos from the Greek, is how we mind, our home, how we manage the money in the home. So the way economics is used is almost a mismanagement today.
I have to challenge you about something, and I think everyone who has come to this conference who is genuinely interested in the issues is actually genuinely interested in change. Mm-hmm. So even the executive from Shell is genuinely interested in change. It's not just a greenwashing exercise, but there is, I agree, having listened very carefully to his language, that sense of disconnection that happens around whatever it is, that economic driver towards wanting to extract from the earth, and thinking that there are very good developmental reasons for it, compared to perhaps thinking that there are other ways of doing that. I guess that's what we are. We all have a desire to want to make the world a better place.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So it's the mind set.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with that. I appreciate your comment there. And I think what I'm trying to say is we all have come from that. We've come from a place in our heart with that. That's true. But when it comes down to actually really changing our company ethos, sometimes that is very challenging and very difficult. So thank you. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Do I need it? I don't think.
Yeah.
So I agree with this, and that's why I'm here. But one of the things that interests me also, though, is that if you look at other species, like gypsy moths, for example, or deer on an island without any wolves on it, they will also overexploit their resources to the point of collapse. And could we make the same argument that they're not in touch with nature? I mean, maybe it's merely that our sense that we're different, or our sense that our ability to notice that we're over-consuming can translate into changing of behavior. Maybe that's just illusory, and we're just as biologically driven as actually are being in touch with nature, just like any other species that will eat itself out of house and home until it collapses if there are no predators. And maybe that's being in touch with nature and not being in touch with nature.
And that's something we talk about a lot in ecopsychology for sure, and I've certainly contemplated that myself. What is our species actually doing that? Are we on an evolutionary time frame or in some sort of a process that in 1,000 years there won't be a Homo sapien on the earth? I don't know the answers to that at all. Don't even pretend to try to imagine that. I do know that while I'm here, I want to live as well as I can and contribute the most that I can for sure. And yes, there are other species that have contributed to their own annihilation. But I think the idea behind this is not so much to get into the minutiae of what every species is doing. I'm trying to look at just us, our ecosystem right now and what we're doing. And if you think about the species that are, profound in numbers, like ants or termites or what used to be bees, although we've lost the but just say ants. Maybe one of the most predominant species on the planet, but still they live very sustainably. We can make the argument that we are also a predominant species on the planet, not so much by numbers or form as compared to ants, but by force. By force. And so that's what I'm trying to look at a little bit. What is it that our force on the planet is doing psychologically?
I just wanted to say that, in Australia, where we've got mining, some of the people who are mining fossil fuels are framing it in the sense of we're actually helping people get out of poverty. It's providing energy which is environmental to
Yeah, that brings up the point about the psychological dimension, because I think once you have some capacities in that area, you can see through that kind of greenwashing or well, not untruthful situation. So, moving along then, I love to use the image of a pond to sort of start this work with. If we're going to explore our ecosystem, then how do we do that and what does that mean? And so I want to start with this image of a pond and kind of walk us through how we do this process, because that really is what the day is about, is actually the rolling up our sleeves and looking at our ecosystem a little bit today. So the pond is a great image for studying our ecosystem, because there's so much going on in a pond, as you all know. Things going up, around the pond, the riparian zone, things that we can see in the flora and the fauna, and of course, multiple things going on underneath the water that we can't see unless we have particular instruments or microscopic tools to do that. So it's a